We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella, Dei Mater Alma, atque semper Virgo, Felix te porta.
Welcome, everybody. Steve with Sense Fidelity coming back with Aaron again from, well, Tradivox and other projects. If he wants to talk about those, he can, as always. But we've had him on twice already, I think. Maybe once. I don't know. No, twice. Once on this and once on Benedictus. So we're getting back to his bread and butter, his baby, Tradivox, which, if you guys don't have it, I would recommend everyone going to either the website, which will be in the show notes, or go to the Tradivox subscription where you can get in. They'll send you one, I think, once a month or anything. And because they have currently, and you see it over my shoulder here, over there, 8 volumes, Catechisms, which everyone knows we need more of to understand the faith. And there's more than one catechism, which is what Aaron's been pulling out for the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So we're talking about volume 3, but Aaron, how you doing? And welcome back. And yeah, tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing since we last talked.
Sure thing. Well, appreciate being back, Steve. It's always good to chat with you. Golly, the Tradivox project, it's continuing, full bore. We're in, as you said, 8 volumes in print currently, but we just submitted the manuscripts for 14. And listeners may already be aware, the general project is to kind of reclaim, remaster just the best of the best catechisms classically in English that are in print. So a lot of this involves archival research, microfilm, etc. And then just cleaning and repolishing graphics in some cases. Some of the catechisms have, of course, gorgeous old woodcuts or engravings and so on. And then republishing, as you mentioned. So there'll be it's looking like we'll land right around 40 catechisms total in the hardback collection, which will be a 20-volume collection. So I see yours in the back there, Steve. I got some of mine stacked up in here over my shoulder. So yes, there's 8 in print currently, but yes, there's another 12.
You have the original black cover.
There it is. Yes. So and it's funny because some of that's that's contraband now. I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
It's a limited edition. Yeah. So the original operation, we had been, of course, the research side and kind of the manuscript work side this has been 10 plus years, but it wasn't until 2019 that His Excellency Bishop Schneider, who's Episcopal advisor for the whole project, he kind of encouraged us to partner with a larger publisher just so that more folks would know about the project and have access to it. And we kind of envisioned it as like a scholarly tool beginning that wouldn't have a whole lot of lay folks interested in. But Bishop was very encouraging of that, which I'm grateful for, because he was absolutely right. I mean, the minute that we kind of went public with, especially with a partnership through the Sophia Institute Press, doing the kind of the fulfillment, the hardback binding. They did a great job, with the gold foil and everything. And so they kind of understood the vision a little more, and we partnered with them so that they could take over all of the warehousing things while we focused on the research. And since that time, it's just been a huge response. And I am still just floored by kind of the write-ins that we get or feedback that we get on the project. Folks, that they'll read a catechism from 100 years, 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. Our oldest are going to be in the early 1200s. It's in volume 6. And so spanning, the better part of a millennium in English catechisms. And we're just taking the highlights, we're taking the best from that's available in English from the thousands of catechisms that have been produced in the last several centuries. And so when folks read these and they see this remarkable continuity of doctrine across time, but also space. I mean, we have texts that are coming from, in every known language, that we're kind of taking. Some of these are translations from, the originals. And it's amazing to just stack them up side by side. And that's really the goal of the project, is to demonstrate that continuity of faith across time and space.
Has somebody said this to you? Why do I need to get 20 volumes of catechisms? Isn't one good enough? Why do I need Bellarmine? And why do I need to read Tuberville? Why do I need Sandler? Why do I need Aquinas? If they all say the same thing, why do I need to study all this?
It's true. I would be the first to say you don't need all of them. If by need you mean to understand the basics of the faith and be saved. It's the value of a project like this is, for one, as a study tool, as you mentioned. There are certain aspects of the faith that are brought out by each of these authors that are totally unique to them. So one we're hoping to talking about today, Challoner. So English bishop, really a hero of the faith, and he has this fascinating take on the mysteries of faith through the lens of the liturgy. One of the catechisms. There's actually 3 different catechisms that he wrote in this volume, and so that kind of perspective, very much unique to him in that time. And then Aquinas, folks are familiar with, of course, Peter Canisius, and Pius X. We have these major saints that have written catechisms, oftentimes more than one, per author. So in terms of the study value, that's really why we launched the project, was being able to do this kind of compare, contrast in terms of how this perennial content, the actual dogma, the doctrine, and then how it's presented, time to time and place to place. And that's what's really the value of a project like this, is everybody finds their favorite. Folks that I was talking to somebody the other day that says, yeah, I'm pretty sure Frasinetti now, he's my favorite. They've been getting every volume as it comes. And Sophia built it out as a 3-month, like a quarterly subscription, which was a great idea. Wish I'd thought of it. And so every 3 months, there's just, it's a $25 charge, comes every quarter, and then you get a new volume of classic catechisms. And somebody who is a subscriber pointed this out. They got the latest one, volume 8, which is Italian catechisms, really 2 of the greatest Italian catechisms. Pope St. Pius X, which a lot of folks are still familiar with, kind of one of the best brief catechisms really ever composed, Pius X. And then his kind of his predecessor in many ways, which was Venerable Frasinetti. Folks may be familiar with that name from his sister, who is a canonized saint. He himself is a venerable and was called kind of the curé of Italy in his time. He was a very holy, very erudite priest. Wrote a fantastic catechism himself. So anyway, so I was talking to somebody recently. They said, I've been trying to keep tabs on all the catechisms. They're all so great, but I've decided, Frasinetti, I think he's my favorite. So everybody kind of lands on their go-to. I still haven't revealed mine, but folks will ask what I recommend, and I'll do that. But I tend not to share the ones that I like the most. Just because it's really not for everybody. We have one, for instance, there's one catechism we will do in the 20-volume series. It has to be done. It's the French, the great Abbe Gaume, the Catechism of Perseverance, which is massive. It's just gigantic, and it's one of many multi-volume catechisms that were produced, especially in the last 3 centuries. And but we could only afford to do one of these in the hardback series, one of the multi-volume ones. So we picked Gaume, who's kind of, a lot of folks are familiar with him, certainly in France would be familiar with him, and he's really the milestone in terms of multi-volume catechisms. And so but then again, you can't come to just anybody and say, here, read this catechism. It's only 400 pages times 3 or whatnot. So it really does. It depends on what the target audience is, personal preference, and then the approach that each author takes, which is why in the series, in the print series, I should say, we also give kind of a lengthy preface for each of these, explaining, what the context was for the works that are in this particular volume, because most of the volumes have more than one catechism in them, and then talking through, what's some of the focal areas that this author takes, or what's a unique kind of mode of presentation that he gives to the truths of the faith here. So hoping to kind of give folks a sampling, a way to kind of view each of the texts as they come out. And then volume 20 is really a standalone golden key to the whole series. That's just an index. Volume 20 is a standalone index which references, the full gamut, the other 19 volumes in the series. So it will really be a very concise kind of catechism in itself. It'll be a systematic index as well as an alphabetical index, and it'll reference the full series.
I'll give my answer as repetitio mater studiorum. If they're just repeating, the repetition is the mother of all studies. So if you get one, even though it might say the same thing, it's still getting hardwired in your head. There's some catechisms for kids that are involved in this. The historical facts or the context of that you bring up in this, like the Bellarmine one or the Sandler one. It was just that's the coolest part, I think, of the whole project, is who these people were, why were they writing it, who was the audience, where was it, and would you die if you had it in your possession? I mean, things like that makes you think, wait a minute, I can have a catechism over there in the corner and show everybody about it. No one says a thing. You have this one in your possession, they killed you.
Yes, it's so true. It's and I wish we could do more in terms of the narrative side of it. We do a fair piece, for each of the volumes, but there's just more than you could ever tell, of course, in a preface, for sure, even in one book. And Challoner is one of those. I mean, so we're looking at Bishop Challoner's catechism. Is volume 3. So he has three different catechisms, and he is one of these about whom several books, of course, have been written. And really, it's a shame he's not more well known, especially English-speaking Catholics. Of course, in England, there's a little more knowledge. It's just the UK generally, but he's just this incredible, really an Athanasius-like figure in his period. You find yourself in an England. There he is. Great. Somebody's. He shows up on the scene when England is really just kind of face down. English Catholicism is gone through now multiple generations of civil liberty suspensions and suppression. You have still kind of the worst of the penal laws, they're called, that are on the books at this time. And they're sporadically enforced. It's not kind of uniform everywhere across the island, but anytime there's any kind of unrest, the Catholics are kind of an easy dead horse to kick, as it were, for everybody else. And so you have the way that the faith is maintained at this point is almost exclusively in these really well-to-do families. The recusant families, as they're called, they are retaining the faith and oftentimes retaining priests. So you have a couple of the foreign embassies that are permitted sometimes to host priests for saying Holy Mass there, but far and away the most frequent way that anybody would access Mass or the sacraments was through this kind of underground network of families that were in communication with each other, and then clergy that were also obviously in communication. And so it's just a dismal time by the time you hit Bishop Challoner's period, because there's just no end in sight. I mean, Queen Mary, there's this brief reprieve, in the prior century, and then it just seems like, well, England is lost to the face by the time that Challoner gets there, early 1700s. And his life spans almost the whole of that century, the 18th century. And so you're seeing this massive sociocultural upheaval across Europe in that period, obviously French Revolution and everything else. And in England, the church is just being rained on. The monasteries, the convents have been just suppressed, across the country. The Catholics are underground. They're seeking to evade civil law just to teach even their own children the truths of the faith. I mean, you have laws on the books at that time for the discovery of a popish schoolmaster, and there were some very, very nice, tidy fines available. Not only
I saw the rewards that you posted. That was huge.
Yes, I mean big money stuff, especially for priests and bishops. So the idea that you would find a bishop, I think it's in the preface of it. Oh yes, so we've got the clergy, which would sometimes be £100 sterling. I mean, £100 sterling is 20 grand or plus per incident. So that neighbors down the street are hosting Father George or Bishop Richards every so often for mass, and you're looking at that 20 grand thinking, yeah, maybe somebody might just get informed about this, and I could see a little extra income stream for this fiscal year. These are just very real, very concrete dangers that the faithful regularly encountered at the time that Bishop Challoner comes on the scene. So it is, as you say, the catechisms are they're dangerous. They're dangerous propaganda. They're contraband. In fact, at Bellarmine's, Bellarmine's Catechism, so Volume 2, Tradivox series, we have Bellarmine, and at that time, when that comes out, they actually created significant and distinct laws for the possession of what they just generally called a Bellarmine book. I mean, just anything written by Bellarmine. He was such a known name by that point in England that he was public enemy. so yeah, if you had a Bellarmine book, or any of these popish catechisms, this was contraband and evidence to indict you in court.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, Ryan will talk to you, and we'll talk about the English Reformation all the time, and I would love for him to incorporate Bellarmine into that because, just that idea of it's not a big book; it's just a couple. It's almost like a penny catechism style in a sense, and yet that was so influential that the people in England were ready to lock you up or kill you over that. It's utterly amazing, the time period. I guess you could compare it to maybe Muslim lands, I guess. And the Catholics there now.
Yes, I think so, and we hope to avoid the pangs of censorship that were endured by our forebears, but I think we're already seeing that in the postmodern West, and I would expect that to continue apace. Really, when the only dogmas for which people can be publicly punished for are things like upholding natural law and upholding the definitions of man or woman or marriage or these kind of things. So I think we'll in short order see that kind of thing brought to bear on texts as well. We're already seeing these kind of hate crime laws and these things come into place. So it certainly will take a different form, but I think it would behoove us all to be more aware of our Catholic history in that regard, that we are not new to the work of proclaiming a message deemed unproclaimable by our regnant civil authorities. So there's some fantastic lessons in there for us historically. And as you say, it makes the reading of these catechisms even more poignant as we look at it. I mean, Bishop Challoner, in fact, it's amazing, this account as a bishop. So can I jump in and tell a little story?
Yeah, go for it.
About him. So he's just this incredible witness and testimony to how you don't know the good that you do, what its ultimate kind of a fruit will be. You leave that to God, because Bishop Challoner is a great example of that. He is a teenager. His father passes away, and it's just him and his mother left. When and Protestant, forgot to mention that. So he's one of the first well, that's a tangent. Anyways, he's raised Protestant. His father's a Presbyterian, and when he dies, his father, his mother is kind of destitute. Looking for work. It's just one of the worst times to be deprived of a husband, just in terms of provision, because England also just financially is really suffering at this point. Not just Catholics, but throughout. And so she's looking for work, and she's hired in as a household staff, really, as a maid, we would kind of call it today, but they generally had more duties in that time, and were often live in the premises. So she's hired as household staff by this Catholic family, the Gage family, and even still, nobody really knows why. It's kind of this fluke thing, because Catholics never, or at least almost never, hired known Protestants into the household staff. Why? Because typically these Catholic families were the ones doing these illicit civil disobedience acts on a regular basis in their
Popish gatherings.
That's right. And so often they would even bring in staff just to give the staff and even volunteers at times access to Mass and the sacraments.
Yeah.
And so it was like being on the inside track for Catholics at that time. And but they hire in this widow and her kind of teenage son, the Gages, and through that association, they come into the Challoners, come into the circle of the Stafford family, and the Staffords have this amazing legacy themselves. The Viscount Richard Stafford, who's two generations prior, is a martyr, martyred for the faith. He's in these incredible old engravings of him, because he was, Viscount. I mean, it wasn't nobility, but he was a gentleman and highly regarded. But he's executed for the faith, even at an older age. I think he was maybe mid-60s or so. So this kind of venerable old gentleman who's killed for the faith in the early years of the persecutions, and so they keep his memory alive. The Stafford family, portraits of him. They're of course convinced of his sanctity, and having suffered for the faith, it's very evident that's the only charges he was brought upon, and so they ask his intercession, on a regular. They tell the stories of those who were there to see it, even the grandchildren that are told the stories, and so here come the Challoners into the ambit of this Catholic family, and that's really where Richard is taught the faith. He starts to kind of inquire what's this whole Catholic thing about, and we know that you don't have the true faith. You have these kind of popish superstitions and whatnot, but it's really kind of strange. And why this, why that? These relics. I mean, what's up with that? So asking these questions, because he's of course regularly in they're exposed, to these realities, and so it's through that the priest, who's the staff chaplain of the household, Father Gother, who himself is this incredible story behind him. He's a controversialist. He's writing, he's publishing secretly, out of the home and things. And so, but it ends up is the family chaplain at this time. And Father Gother receives this inspiration with regard to young Richard, and kind of takes him under his wing, is teaching him the doctrines, and says, you're called to this. This is your birthright, and I'm going to ensure that there's a seminary fund available for you when you go to Douay, Douay College, which is so at that time. Your listeners may know Douay, or in England Douay they call it, as in the Douay Rhymes Bible, that many are familiar with that term, is one of the great English colleges for training priests and then sending them back on what they call the English mission. Mm-hmm. And Father Gother here at the Stafford family is telling young Challoner, I think you're called to this. He ends up receiving him into the church there, and then says, if you if you discern that our Lord wants you to be a priest, I will, I'll make all the arrangements that you can go to overseas, go to Douay, and come back a priest. And so he does. I mean, and so it's just this fascinating, lesson of a little change of family associations. Where this Catholic family, they bring in, a widow and her son. He ends up entering the church and ends up going off to do a college for training as a priest. And then as he returns, it's this the incredible chapter opens of his ministry, his mission back on the island after returning a priest.
Do we know why he wrote the catechisms? I was trying to think. I read the preface, and I don't remember, but it talks about the 3 volumes. There's 3 texts in the book. The first volume, the cool part about that is the abridgment is there's a prayer at the end that was, as you say, the final chapter contains an act of love of neighbor that is rendered all the more moving by its having been recited by Catholics on not a few English scaffolds of the day. And again, just think about the time. You see the photos behind me of the English martyrs at the Carthusians. The second text, perhaps leading credence to the old Catholic truism, because of the heated persecution of the author, it's the Mass that matters. And then if you read it, you get into he gives a bunch of the prayers about baptism and confession, and it lays out everything that's supposed to be going on in it. It's really incredible how he pulled this off and did it because of the attack on the paganism of popery. And the third volume, The Grounds of Catholic Doctrine, published in 1732. It's intended for poorly educated, faithful, or non-Catholic inquirers. So what was this? Do we know the motivation to start this catechism series of his?
Yes, he really landed in an England that was, as we mentioned before, a persecuted church, but also one that had growing resources in terms of print. I would love to see somebody do a book that's kind of a more deep dive on really the history of print, just the print book in England, especially in kind of the Reformation period. Most people will focus, of course, on the content, like what's getting said, what's getting talked about. But just ancillarily in the research, we come across a lot more of kind of the details of what's happening. And at this point, you have really more and more presses available. That is like the physical engine for the production of a book. They're getting smaller. They're getting more lightweight. They're getting more transportable. You have the wagon back press, they're called. So it was one that you could basically hook up like a little trailer, and kind of drive it around. And you could park it at somebody's house on somebody's estate, let's say. And if you had sufficient reams of paper and maybe 2 or 3 people, you could crank out a couple books in a few hours. And that was big time stuff back then.
Yeah.
So this technology is really is kind of rising, and then you have, of course, a tremendous need to be met, which is you're now, by the time Richard comes back to the continent, he's facing a period where you've had enough dissemination of these Protestant errors for that time that very much like we run into today, there's kind of this proof texting that's beginning to happen now. There's folks are familiar enough with with Protestantism, the various tenets of not just Anglicanism. It only is beginning to be called that at this point, but just the various kind of sects, and so the scriptural texts that they base a lot of these claims on, these kind of false doctrines on, they're becoming a little more just like the earworm thing. They're just a little more ingrained, and so what Challoner found was there's this huge dearth of not just catechisms, so folks that can learn their faith, the Catholics can learn their faith, but also with an apologetic kind of aspect, so they can answer these direct kind of challenges, oftentimes made from different chapter and verse scriptural assertions. And so he, of course, this isn't new to him, but in England, there was a great need for more texts like this. And so he writes multiple catechisms. We have the three most significant are in volume 3. As you say, the first is the Abridgement. This is very much like the Douay Catechism that folks are familiar with. That's also in volume 2 of our series, but that's a very concise. It's generally not what at that time they called controversialist, what we would call just apologetic. It's generally not that kind of approach. It's really more Baltimore style, kind of just the facts. And then he saw again this need to get a little more of an exploded view, and that was where we got especially the grounds of the Catholic doctrine. That's the third in this volume, which is almost entirely it can be read. It's a question and answer format. I'll just read one. So let's see. It's they're all so concise. But okay, so question 423 talks about. Sorry, I'll just pull. Let's see, 56. Or 55. Are we not commanded to receive the sacrament in remembrance of Christ? A sign about, of course, the Eucharist. Yes, we are. St. Paul lets us know what it is that is to be the object of our remembrance when he tells us, "You do show forth the Lord's death till he comes." This remembrance is not opposite to the real presence of Christ's body and blood. On the contrary, what better remembrance can there be than to receive under the sacramental veils the same body and blood in which he suffered for us? That is to say, he's setting up almost every Q&A is Protestants say this, we believe this. So they're all structured like that, which is it's just fantastic. So section on saints and angels. Do you have any reason to think the saints and angels have any knowledge of our addresses or petitions that are made to them? Yes, we have. First, and then goes through 2 pages of here's why the angels hear and respond to our prayers. All from Scripture, from reason, from tradition. So it's very it's an apologetic text, but it is not designed to be strictly kind of meeting arguments, but also giving a little more context to a Catholic who might be kind of set on their heels by some of this proof texting really that's going on at that point.
No, yeah, it's a solid, as you said, apologetic. I was thinking the same thing. It's a solid little education apologetic resource, and that's what basically what the whole book is. It's a catechism with apologetics, with basic teaching, which you can go with. We mentioned families, or I mentioned kids. You can go with the first 38 pages, which is the Abridgement of Christian Doctrine. A child could go through that easily, and then go through the grounds of Catholic doctrine, which is what we were just talking about, the apologetic part, and that gets you a little, dust off the, maybe you have a Protestant in your family that's asking these same questions. I mean, the chapters are the church, the Scripture, profession of faith, the church, Scripture and tradition, sacraments, real presence, communion, one kind, the Mass, purgatory, veneration and invocation of saints, images, indulgences, supremacy of St. Peter and his successors, and he brings up a conclusion. And then for the entire family, to bring up the Catholic Christian Instructed of 1737. That's got some meat in it.
It does, and the Catholic Christian Instructed will ring so familiarly to readers who will attend the traditional rites, the Roman Rite, because it is copy paste. I mean, there are large sections in Catholic Christian Instructed that reference and kind of expound upon the prayers of the Holy Mass and the rites of some of the different sacraments. This is really the most kind of unique of Bishop Challoner's text, is that he also saw a need for a greater catechesis on the liturgy itself. So if you can imagine, it's difficult even to find its access traditional liturgy at this time. And then those that do, it can often be sporadic. And how well formed are they on what do these things mean? Tell me the meaning of these things. What is the mystical signification of what the priest is doing? What are good ways for me to pray during Holy Mass? And you can read this like a Latin Mass 101. I mean, parts of his catechism. So I love, like, on we got page 146. We has a whole section on in what manner ought the people to be employed during the Mass. The answer: in such prayers and devotions as are suitable for that holy sacrifice. And then he goes through some of the different ways. What kind of prayers and devotions would you esteem to be the best adapted to the different parts of the Mass?
Yeah.
Then he goes through all the different parts of the Mass and talks through, well, at the beginning of Mass, we might apply the soul to God, but begging divine grace for worthily and profitably assisting at the sacrifice. At the Confiteor, and then up to the Kyrie, so he goes through each part of the Mass. And of course, those who attend the traditional Mass today is like looking in a mirror, because the reality is 1700s, the missal used in the 1700s, with the exception of some of the propers, of course, the calendar of saints and things. I mean, it really is copy paste, even more so because those that have a Latin English missals today will recognize, identical translations even of some of the Mass propers in this catechism from the mid 1700s, the early 1700s. So it's a fantastic way of also kind of looking at the faith, looking at the truths of the faith, but through the lens of classical liturgy, the prayer of the church, which of course brings us back to that old adage, the lex orandi, lex credendi. As the church believes, so she prays. As she prays, so she believes. And this is really a clear testimony to that.
Yeah, he brings up outside the Mass every sacrament. Literally goes through every sacrament and the ritual that's part of it. The churching of women, fasts, canonical hours, festivals of the church, invocation, angel of saints, devotion of Blessed Virgin Mary, use and veneration of relics, use of pictures and images, exorcisms and benedictions. So a very liturgical work, indulgences and jubilees, saying the Mass in Latin, page 150.
Well, we should look at that, because why say the Mass in Latin? I mean, you folks can't even understand that stuff. You got those old words. I mean, the charges have not changed at all. This is what's so fascinating. These apologetic works and controversialist works and old catechisms. It's like, wow, I'm pretty sure I heard this just yesterday. These same kind of assertions. I just want to read that one because it's so good. So this is question 200 in Catholic Christian Instructed. Why does the Church celebrate Mass in Latin rather than in the vulgar language, that is to say, the vernacular? Was it? Answer: first, because it is her ancient language, used in all her sacred offices, even from the apostles' days, throughout all the western parts of the world, and therefore the Church, which hates novelty, desires to celebrate her liturgy in the same language as the saints have done for so many ages. Second, for greater uniformity in public worship, so that the Christian, in whatsoever country he chances to be, may still find the liturgy performed in the same manner and the same language to which he's accustomed at home. Something about unity in there. I don't know. And the Latin is certainly, of all languages, the most proper for this, as being the most universally studied and known. That's an interesting historical side point. Third, to avoid the changes to which all vulgar languages, as we find by experience, are daily exposed. For the Church is unwilling to be chopping and changing her liturgy at every turn of language. Fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah.
And when I first read that, I immediately thought of Dr. Wood's book, Sacred Then, Sacred Now. And he brings up that story of an Italian World War One. He was either Italian or U.S. And he's in Italy, maybe it's U.S. and he's going to Italy, and he goes Mass and it's the same Mass. He goes to France, it goes the same thing. He goes to Germany, it's the same. He goes each country, it's the same thing. Then he goes. Now, he might go out for a smoke break during the sermon because it's an Italian or French, but he goes back in and everyone's united. It's the same thing. If you go to a traditional Mass, you notice that. I remember back in Denver, I would say there was a family from Africa in front, There was a family from Mexico to my left, a Chinese family to my right. All the nations were represented in one place under one language instead of being separated in different groups and never talk to each other.
Yes, I found fascinating the fact that that exact issue, this need for endless vernacular, or as Challoner puts it, vulgar language translations, generates no end of course, doctrinal issues.
Mhm.
Are we talking about the same terms? But also, just as you say, this kind of cultural cohesion around the same thing, and Challoner mentions that from a contemporary of his, that is to say, a Protestant contemporary of his, who's Dr. Halen. So he has this excerpt that I have to read. So he says, as for Protestants, we learn from Dr. Halen's History of the Reformation. So again, this is
Mhm.
a Protestant writing about the emergence of the revolts, the Protestant revolt. Dr. Halen writes, quote, "The Irish Parliament passed an act for uniformity of common prayer," that is to say, uh, the new religion in its liturgical expression. "They gave permission for saying the same in Latin, where the minister did not have the knowledge of the English tongue, but for translating it into Irish, the Gaelic, there was no care taken. The people therefore required by that statute, under severe penalties, to frequent their churches and be present at the reading of the English liturgy, which they understood no more than they do the Mass." The Latin. "By which means," this continues Dr. Halen, "by which means we have furnished the papists with an excellent argument against ourselves for having the divine service celebrated in such a language as the people do not understand," right? So the whole issue at the time is like, well, now the vernacular is the only thing that really is sensible, except everywhere else in the world where our vernacular isn't understood, right? Uh, yes, just a few Sundays ago, you mentioned that your experience. I had something very similar. I was standing room only, one of these masses. I'm in the back, and I was next to a mother that was from Africa, and then another couple that came out, and afterwards, and she spoke barely any English. They were a Hispanic couple, I presume, in Mexico or Honduras maybe, and and he spoke a little more English, and she looked so excited. It was her first. She had it's her first traditional mass that she had attended that day, and she's trying to kind of say, in Spanish and some broken English, her experience, and the gentleman's kind of trying to half translate. Then she kept saying this word "foundación," which I thought was so profound. She was saying, like, it seems like this foundation. She was trying to kind of get at that really unrepeatable sense of the antiquity, of the rite itself, because it is, as the old Father Fortescue would say, it is the most venerable rite in Christendom. So it does. It speaks for itself. But I think readers of Challoner will find themselves in immediate good company when they get into his sections on the Mass, on the other sacraments, on explaining some of the ritual significance for communicating the truths of the faith. Because it is, folks kind of intuit this, but the old rites are just shot through with dogma. I mean, they just can't help themselves. It's like I can't remember who first said this. I saw this somewhere. They said that the old liturgies are dogma in motion, or like dogma set to music, dogma set to poetry, and it very much is that way. Not just in the texts of the actual prayers, the orations, and so on, but the gestures. I mean, the whole tapestry, really, of the traditional rites communicates truths of faith in a very profound way. I mean, a way that, in fact, Challoner himself. So I share another story about him. When he comes into the country, he's committed to, in his spare time, writing these new texts for use, kind of on the ground, in the trenches in now Protestantized England, and but he's also receiving people into the church, as folks forget. I mean, there were converts in the midst of this incredible oppression of the church. just like there are anywhere that the church is oppressed. Folks are, blood of the martyrs, that whole thing is the seat of the church. And so he is also receiving people into the church. And there's one account of, I believe it's the account itself, I believe, was given about an anonymous bishop, but it's pretty likely it was Challoner, where this couple had been basically instructed in the truths of the faith through one of these catechisms, discreted kind of in their pocket in the public square as they walk by. Here's what you need to know, and put the little abridgment in the pocket, and they're kind of studying their way into the faith when there's hardly anybody there to hold their hand and bring them along, teach them. All the teachers are in hiding and things, So they kind of study their way in. They realize, the truths of Catholicism. They want to convert. Word somehow gets through the grapevine to a bishop somewhere. So there's a Catholic bishop, over here. We're not entirely sure where, but he knows that we want in, and they've kind of vetted us for a while, make sure we're not spies and everything else. And so then the one day they're told, hey, come to, there's a pub kind of downtown, I believe it's London, and kind of connected to it, there's a house. A lot of times they'd have the public house would be kind of a bar, and then also a hotel, some kind of a hostel type arrangements where folks could sleep over. There's some upper rooms above there, and so come to the attic room at such and such a day, such and such time, and say this word to the first person at the door. And so they come in and they give the password to somebody who's looking a little cross-eyed at them, and so, okay, so they go up the stairs and they come to the second person, and oh, who are you? Oh, well, we're Mr. and Mrs. We're here to see the bishop. And oh, okay, yeah, so you come in there, and there's this. Then out from another side door shuffles this older gentleman, kind of street clothes, and some people are trickling in and kind of taking seats, and they realize as he goes to the back of the room and hauls out this old chest and opens it, and he's taking out vestments, that have been hidden there, and lighting candles, and they say, oh wow, we're here, it's a pontifical mass. They go to their first ever mass, and it's a pontifical mass, presumably Bishop Challoner, and he receives them into the church. They afterwards they get the kind of the final catechesis and scrutiny, and they're they abjure their errors. They're received into the church, are confirmed. I mean, so it's just amazing, these accounts of Bishop Challoner, just the heroism that he displayed in carrying on the faith for decades. I mean, he lives most of the 18th century, and just sees so much good work is gained at that time. Some of the Catholic emancipation, those acts, they're first really discussed towards the end of his life, and he's doing more things, kind of pushing the envelope in terms of civil law, where he's starting to do more gatherings with priests, and even ensuring that people know in terms of the civil court that they know that it's happening, and so things like this, where he's setting up orphanages, he's working to promote funding for different Catholic apostolates and things. Just pushing it his whole life, really. And so it's not until after his death that some of these official kind of the civil acts for relief, some measures of relief on Catholics begin to come about. And so in the midst of that, he's writing these confessional texts, writing these catechisms just to give, as well as devotional works. He also writes several devotional works just to really build up the faith of Catholics at the time, but then also to give reasons for the hope that is in us, as St. Peter says, that folks are still converting or coming into the church even at this time, in many ways, thanks to heroes like Bishop Challoner.
So there's another example of not all catechisms are the same too. I mean, you have 3 different ones that this one man wrote, and one's an apologetic one that's different from the others from the other series. This one has a lot in the Mass, which is, I've read the other, nothing like that in the other ones. So go ahead and get the series. Like I said, It's good for the education of your kids. It's give them something to read for yourself, get you jacked on the situation. Because again, I love seeing the historical part of this, hearing the stories about who wrote these things, and then reading them because it puts a mind on, man, this is what these guys were dealing with at those times. Instead of just saying, oh, well, ho hum, here's the Baltimore Catechism, go read it. This gives like another level to it. I don't know if that does that to you, but that's how I feel about them.
It absolutely does. In fact, there's a certain degree, I think, of reverence owed to many of these texts for the reasons that you say. And we hit that note pretty strongly with Volume 1 in the series, because it really is written by a martyr for martyrs. I mean, that's some of the early Father Vos in Volume 1. And his catechism, this popish catechism in English that he composes, which too many are unfamiliar with now, but it was part of the body of evidence brought against him that saw him die. He died in prison for in many ways the writing of this exact catechism. And there's not a few others that are like that as well. So yes, it does. It gives a certain kind of gravity to learning the truths of our faith, knowing the truths of our faith, being able to hand them on, and recognizing that they have a kind of a degree of such preciousness that they really merited the ultimate sacrifice in a lot of these authors, that they gave everything they had, everything they were for the continuation of this faith in the different places they were, different times they lived. And Bishop Challoner is one. I mean, you can't end without mentioning his earthly end, because he dies in the aftermath of the worst rioting in the history of England. And so London sees this massive mob basically escape, 1781, and they called it King Mob because it was, well, there was just a lot of political instability at the time, and certain things kind of led to certain actions.
That's never happened before. I don't know what you're talking about.
And it just resulted in complete mob rule in the city of London. And you're talking about, the major industrial and civil center of this island nation. So total mob rule, opening of prisons and I mean, it was like
LA.
Yeah, it was just madness. And so for whatever reason, there was this consistent and very intentional seeming targeting of Catholic homes and Catholic businesses, and many of them in the downtown area, almost like, golly, they had been flagged beforehand. But anyways, one of the targets was a bishop that they knew was hiding out somewhere downtown London. They had the city block figured out, and they were going house to house looking for Bishop Challoner, who at that point is in his 80s. He's an old man, and he doesn't want to leave. And those that are keeping him, the recusant family hiding him, are pleading with him. Bishop, this will be the end. Like, we can't protect you. We don't have a private army. These kind of things. And he finally is prevailed upon to leave just hours before the mob kind of makes it there. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they're dragging people out in the streets and beating, and it's just awful. And so Bishop Challoner escapes through kind of a narrow architectural gap, and he makes it to a country house. Another close friends. They put him up, and it's just several weeks later that he dies, apparently of a stroke. It was just such a massive, because it persisted for weeks. I mean, and the damage, of course, was catastrophic. Just ruined several families and businesses and things like that. But Bishop Challoner ends his days in the home of a friend. Presumably a stroke or a heart attack, and his last kind of acts are to point to this breast pocket that he had just a couple of dollars, a couple of pounds notes in for the poor. And he always had a great love for those suffering poverty, especially those that were kind of all of a sudden suffering poverty as a result of things like this giant riot in London, where these Catholic families were just regularly, they would be the targets of this kind of mass violence. And so as he's kind of falling from the table, they were at dinner, it seems, and he's kind of gesturing to his pocket like, this is for the poor, you know. And that's how he dies. I mean, you have this hero bishop who worked for the better part of a century, really, to uphold the faith in England, to pass it on, and his one of his he has the Think Well on It is one of them, and the Garden of the Soul is another. That some of these are still in print, little devotional works to help kind of also give subjects for meditation for the faithful, because he always had a focus on we have to know our faith, we have to be able to communicate it to those that we are responsible for, you know, especially parents to children, but also we have to know Christ in really an intimate way in our prayer. We have to be citizens of the next world first. You know, we have to have this profound life of prayer, even in the midst of these kind of dreadful social circumstances, because it's the only thing that matters. For one, it's the better part, as our Lord told Saint Mary, but also that it's the only way to kind of bring ourselves as church, really, as the men and women of the church. It's the only way to kind of navigate these waters, you know, bring ourselves through this period, which is really he was proven right in that over the years.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Garanger writing about Dominic and Francis getting the establishment of the meditation nuns first and then activity afterwards. And well, that's crazy talk, man. We need thousands of programs, death by programs.
Death by programs. Yes, death by programs. That's part of what is a constant kind of a question mark to all ardent believers in programs is what to make of church history. You know, when you have this really remarkable kind of dearth of programs. In fact, you know, anything but programs. You have this mass. I mean, the time of Bishop Challoner in England is just a total, you know, it's like the Wild West out there for Catholics, and yet you have these incredibly robust centers of faith and doctrine. I mean, these martyrs, these heroic accounts, men who would go off and be priests, knowing that was it for them. You know, if they came back and were caught, I mean, that was the end of the line. And yet they saw it so the transcendent value of the faith was so evident to them, even in these periods where you couldn't go see when the mass times were. You couldn't walk down the street and go to such and such a parish that was a parish maybe 3 generations prior. But now there's a different religion being enacted in that church, you know. And so where do they go? Who do they find to talk
On the force of the gun.
Yes. I mean, it's a very powerful period in church history, English Catholics, and Challoner is one of the kind of the hinge, you might say, from between the early kind of the Henrian, the Elizabethan persecution period, and then into kind of what they generally call like the Restoration period, where you have these civil acts for the emancipation of Catholics under the penal laws begins to happen after Challoner's death. So he's kind of he's a good hinge between those periods. And I have one other little side note about him that I think is really inspiring. He was very close friends with another bishop, George Hay, who is actually is one of my favorite catechisms. We won't reprint his, but it's fantastic. So he's a Scotsman, you know, good Scottish bishop, and Challoner and Hay, yeah, right. And without getting into how they met each other, which is this fascinating account, anyways. They become very fast friends, and even more so when they're both kind of elevated to the bishopric. And they make a pact, just the two men, that they will say mass for each other. I think it's 3 times a week that they would say a private mass for the other one every week until they died. until one or the other died, and Challoner dies first, and Hay is faithful to his little promise. They don't even find out that this was a privately made pact between these just erudite and solid, courageous bishops, until after Challoner's dead, and Hay kind of admits that, oh, this is that mass that I say every week, and until he was unable to say mass anymore. Bishop Hay does it for years and years after Challoner's death, and so it's just getting another window into the kind of character of a bishop, a Catholic bishop who is convinced of the truth of the faith he professes, to the extent of offering really his life in its service, in its defense, and takes it so seriously as to make this kind of blood pact with another bishop, both of whom say, look, we know our lives are on the line anytime. There's a nice hefty reward out for our heads, and yet we're so committed to this, and we know that we need grace, and so I'll be there to make meritorious acts for you. I'm going to say mass for you that you have the grace. Well, I'll say mass for you that you have the grace. Do the thing. And that's powerful stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's not just words; it's actions. I know you're a man of many hats. Anything you want to plug?
Boy, well, other than this project, well, of course, the Benedictus, we talked about that. That's still going strong. It's a fantastic resource. That's the kind of monthly companion text for just living a Catholic life. It has propers for the daily mass, but it also, we pull from the hours of lauds and vespers from the traditional breviary for each day. We've got a meditation in there for each day, all from classical, vetted, dead, reliable authors, as well as just all kinds of special sections in there for living the Catholic faith in the home, ways to grow in prayer, ways to more effectively catechize, notes about the different major feasts in a month, all of this stuff. If anybody's familiar with the Magnificat resource, it's something similar. This is patterned on a similar kind of frame, but obviously it's keyed to the Roman Rite, the Latin Mass, the Latin Breviary, etc. So this is classical devotional content to build a traditional Catholic life around. So it's daily content. It comes out once a month. We do the big art and culture and poetry, just all of that. It's excellent. I wish it had been around longer. So I have the good fortune of being a major force behind this as well. And it's we continue to see, we're past 10,000 subscribers now. It's not even, well, just this month is year one. So we just finished the first year of a print publication with over 10,000 subscribers and adding. So it's just a fantastic resource, and
That's pretty solid.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And of course, Benedictus books. So this is its own imprint as well, Benedictus books. So lots of awesome reprints there. I'm not supposed to tell you about one of them, but I will anyway, since it just came out. And that's Prumer, the centenary edition of the great, the estimable, the widely renowned Dominic Prumers' Handbook of Moral Theology. This is a one-stop shop, must-have reference text. Most anybody, pre-seminarians will already be familiar with this, but lay folks, if you don't have a reference work on moral theology, the do's and do nots, this should be required reading. Really, anybody's shelf. This is the Lodestar for classical moral theology. It is stellar. So we pulled out all the stops on this as a centenary edition reprint, and it's over the top. We blew up all the scholarly apparatus. We rectified all of the citation errors, because all of the old, even the old printings of it had errors. So we dug deep on it. We built out the index, so it uses even contemporary terms, but then brings you the right citation. It's stellar. And of course, Father Ripperger, many of your listeners will be familiar with.
Never heard of him.
Father Ritter is a big fan of Prumers, so we had him do the foreword for this because he's of course very familiar. All the fraternity priests and everybody are trained with Prumer. I mean, he's the name in moral theology.
Look it up in Prumer.
Yeah, look it up in Prumer. That's the case.
I mean, there's T-shirts made like that.
It would be for all 10 people who would understand the reference. Yeah.
Aaron, appreciate your time, man. That was great. I'll have all the links in the show notes below. Yeah, definitely check out the Handbook of Moral Theology. Maybe get one for your seminarian or priest as well. If they don't know it, go ahead and buy it for them as a gift. I know it's September, but you can think of Christmas as Christmas gifts to your local priest and maybe the seminary as well. But yeah, the Tradivox, Benedictus, all that will be underneath in the show notes. Go check out the websites. And yeah, Aaron, thanks for your time, man.
Thank you, Steve, so much. Blessings to you, sir.